Hello and welcome to my show. My name is Rashanka Jones, and today I'm going to be talking about a topic that keeps a lot of parents up at night. Maybe they're just walking out of a doctor's office with a confirmed diagnosis of autism, a learning disability, or ADHD. It's a pretty big life transition for them. And suddenly, from a parent, they become a researcher, a lawyer, or an advocate. Joining me today is Andrew Stettner. He is the Senior Director of Economic Security at NELP and also the President of Board of Directors at Autism Society of Maryland. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you for having me on your show.
No, thank you for joining. I am so grateful that you could take the time out today.
Of course.
All right. So, since we are short on time, I just want to jump right into it. To begin with, state level funding. As parents, when we finally get a diagnosis of our child, we hear about the blueprint of Maryland's future and are just always wondering where the billions are going. In simple terms, can you tell us how this money reaches a child who is in need of support at school?
Sure. So, every child with a disability is entitled to a free and appropriate public education. That's the law. It's a federal law that applies, across the United States. The school needs to meet, your child's needs for services, things like speech therapy, occupational therapy, special education, physical therapy. Those are the needs that need to be met, at your school district. So the school district is the one, that is the one, your county schools in Maryland that are paying for the bills, but they pay for special education through a variety of sources, both state, federal, and local. And to date, we've underfunded special education. No part of that has really made the commitment needed to fully meet the needs of our child. The blueprint is something that was put into place to better fund our public schools with a real focus on special education and other students, for example, low-income neighborhoods who need extra attention. But we're still in the process of fully funding the blueprint and also still in the process of figuring out what's really the best way to fund special education here in Maryland.
So, the no budget conversation, I've heard a million times parents complaining that the schools have said that we understand your problem, your child has an issue, but right now we just don't have the budget to support the extra teachers. Because if the school is straight out refusing, like, what do you do?
There's a system issue and then there's your own child's issue. If the placement that your child is in is not giving you the services they need and your child is failing, you need to ask for a different placement. um, One way we talk about it, for better or worse, is called a restrictive environment. The least restrictive environment is just being in a regular classroom with all the other kids, and some kids with special education do fine with that. They just need a little extra help. But if they're not doing well there, they need to go to a more restrictive environment where they get more intensive support. Up all the until the way, if your county schools cannot meet your child's need, you may have to be referred to what's called a non-public school. These are funded, by your county, but are set up to really meet, a higher level of need. So if your child is not progressing at school, they're going backwards, you have to continue to advocate and say this placement is not what's needed until you get what's needed.
Got it. And, moving on to the rights that are available to parents and children with special needs. So, we're trying to navigate the school system, and IEP and 504 plans are the ones that are available at public school systems for parents to ask for their children. In very simple terms, can you explain the difference between these two plans and how and when we should ask for these?
Sure. An IEP is what's called the higher level of need. Basically, it's saying that your child will not progress, in the normal course of education in your county. That's why you need an individualized education plan. That's what that stands for. Do you have a disability that is significant enough that you need a really strong set of accommodations and additional services over time to fulfill your potential? The 504, that's under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. That means really that, and that applies, across our country. That applies at a local pool, that could apply at a hospital. Well, in order for you to access these services in the same way that you're not discriminated against, you need certain changes in the environment and maybe the rules and procedures. That's a Section 504 plan. The IEP has its own educational goals for your child, and that they will track data against those own individualized goals. When it comes to the 504, you're really more tracking things like their grades. Are the accommodations that are in place, are they enough for you to get the grades that you think you can get? Those are a couple of the differences between them. Maybe in shorthand, the IEP is probably for more disabilities that are significant enough that they're really affecting your child's performance at school.
Got it. And so, for example, if a parent has reached out to a school for an IEP or a 504 plan, they honestly don't even know which one would be better for their child. How do they walk into that meeting, that first meeting with the school, feeling more like a partner rather than someone who has to like fight for their rights? Because I feel like a lot of parents feel lost in those meetings and don't know what to ask for. So, what is that one, I wouldn't say hidden right, but like a right that every Maryland parent should know about and should ask for in that meeting?
Let me just say this. No one goes through a training class before you have a child with disability. My daughter is autistic. She has significant disabilities. It was very overwhelming, at the start, for us and our family, because you feel like everyone else on the table knows all these rules and regulations, and you're just kind of, you're on your own, but 100%
Hmm.
what your child needs. That's what they don't know. And you are an equal partner in that meeting. You're equal partner with the school system, even though they have more people, more experience, and more resources on their side. But you're an equal partner. And if you don't agree to what is there, then they can't move forward. They can't go back to the rest of their work for the day. So you really want to understand that you are a full partner. Have confidence, in these meetings. The number one thing that I would say, for us and in our family, and I think others, is making sure that you have the data that you need to know about how your child is doing. You have data that you are bringing. If they're not keeping good data, you keep the data. 5 out of the last 9 days, my child came home crying and upset. 3 out of the last 5 days, he had an emotional outburst at school. So if they're not keeping the data, you have the data. So you bring, because if you're saying that the services that you're getting are not what you needed, you need to have evidence. And so data is really, I would say that's the number one thing, that you want to learn. And then, just be a sponge for information. There's
Hmm.
information that's provided. There's a Maryland Rights and Responsibilities flyer that has to be provided, by law at every meeting. Read that, learn that, familiarize yourself. There's a lot of resources out there. Our organization, Autism Society of Maryland, Parents Place of Maryland, a lot of resources out there. Be a sponge for information. Go to workshops. Talk to other parents. See what they've done. That was huge for us. Talking to other parents with kids that are a little bit older than Talia, to see how they navigated it. That's priceless, because someone has gone through it before and they can kind of school you the way. And no one learns how to do a job solely by reading books, right? You learn by your colleagues. Your colleagues in special education are going to be other parents.
Okay, now that makes total sense. You mentioned that if you don't agree with them, they can't continue their day. What does that mean? Can you elaborate a little bit more? Do they have to work harder to convince us, or what does the law say about that?
I mean, if at the end of the IEP meeting, you don't agree, on the next course of forward, you have a couple of options. You can say we're going to meet again. Say schedule an hour for the meeting. Can come, to it. We're going to meet again, in 2 weeks, to discuss this again. If we come to consensus. If we don't agree, most counties in Maryland have another layer within their county. I live in Howard County. We have what are called instructional facilitators. So that's like a specialist for each level. Elementary, middle, high school. If we can't agree on things, well, maybe they'll bring that person to the next meeting. They're like an expert. We also have administrative review that if the parties can't agree, and then you can take it to mediation. You can hire a lawyer. So essentially, you don't have at the end of the end, just if they don't agree with what you're saying, you don't at the end of the meeting have to say, no, I just agree. Fine, I'll do whatever you say. If you really don't think that's right, you can continue the process.
But why is there so much resistance from schools? There's a lot of resistance in agreeing to what the parent is trying to say. What I don't understand is no parent is going to make this up. Like it is clearly out of need. So why is there so much resistance?
I don't know if I would say there's so much resistance, but I would say is they are dealing with a limited set of resources. It's great that we have such strong rights in the special education context. But whenever you put a legal nature into a conversation, it gets people more cautious
Mhm.
and more guarded. So that, that comes, uh, along to it. And every special education child is different. So they may be answering based on what they think your child needs, but they may not fully understand your child. So I think, those are some of the, dynamics, that, are at play. They have there's certain rules of thumb that they have. They
Okay.
only want to provide 60 minutes of speech, every week. Early said, no, she needs 120 minutes. We compromised on 90. They didn't ever want to go up on 60, but I was just like, she doesn't speak. She needs speech
Mhm.
therapy. She needs it just more than a couple. She needs it every day.
Yeah.
How are you going to get her to speak? So they have certain rules of thumb, I think, just based on their experience and based on the resources. But sometimes you have to push beyond those.
Okay. And, moving on to the local resources and the financial safety net that's available to us. I'm from Howard County too, and I'm speaking on behalf of all the moms and dads here. As a parent, you feel lost. Like, what are the financial safety nets available to us? With your experience at the Autism Society, if a parent is just finding out about autism or learning disability, what are those first few things they should do in the first, say, let's say 48 to 72 hours? Because I'm in terms of like reaching out to people or trying to find how we're going to fund this.
Yeah, I mean, I think let's say your child is younger,
Mhm.
because that's typical, right, for a first diagnosis. I think understanding what your private insurance will support, and then reaching out for two organizations like ours, Autism Society of Maryland. Just getting involved in the resources there, soak in the information, join a support group, get those kind of information out for you. So when our kids are, and then third, put your name on your child on the autism waiver waiting list. I said the most important for last. In terms of like camp services, home based services, respite care, if your child's under 18 and you're not already low income, you're not someone that's already low income enough to qualify for Medicaid, and that's our health insurance program for the poor, or social supplemental income, which is, again, you have to be low income to qualify for that. The only way to get the government to pay for all those things is to get into something called the autism waiver. But it says waiver because it waives the income requirements, and just because your child has autism, then you qualify for government services for a lot of things. The wait list for that service is very long. It's in the 8, 9 year length. Put your child on, as soon as you found diagnosis, it's a 1 page form. Put your child on that wait list, right away. So, you get services as soon as you can. And then there's one other service that's called the Low Intensity Services and Supports, LIS. This is pays for about $500, at a shot. It's a lottery. So it goes twice a year. Again, apply for that right away. It's a simple form to put your name in the lottery. If you win it, there's a little more you have to do. This pays for things like swim lessons. If you need extra gates in your house, for security, things like that. So that's like a smaller one that you can get. So those are maybe four things to do. Check what your insurance will pay for. Um, Connect to support groups. Get on the Medicaid waiver wait list, and sign up for lists.
Awesome. So, in terms of the last two, the Medicaid waiver wait list, and this is something that even families with a good income can apply for.
Correct, because that's why this idea of waiver. The waiver is it's waiving the usual income responsibilities. It's basically treating it basically allows your child to be treated like they're on their own, even though they're a child. So they get the services as if they're on their own. And the theory behind it, just so your listeners understand, is 40 years ago, kids like Talia would have been put in the institution. They wouldn't. They would have told us, no, let's put her away in a home. When we're not doing that anymore, and that would be very expensive for the government, right? So we want to keep people in their homes. So that's the idea of these services. They're for people that have significant disabilities, but we want them to stay in their homes.
So basically, the government is providing a certain amount of money, say every month or every quarter, to provide facilities for that child, right, at home.
These are resources at home, right? So
Okay.
either you get them through an agency,
Okay.
or you could actually be paid yourself as a parent. It was called self-directed.
Got it. And then you mentioned the low intensity support services. I don't know why I have the amount of $2,000.
I think it was cut down to 1,000 now, and it's 500 twice a year. But I could be. It's been moved. The number moved. The number has moved around a little bit the last couple of years. So I don't know the exact. It may. It used to be 2,000. I thought they cut it back down to 1,000 or 500 half a year. But I could be wrong about that. It may be back to 2,000.
And this is
But
also like extracurricular activities to support those kind of things, right?
right, these are like the extracurricular activities, modifications to your house. Let's say you need a special car seat, durable equipment like that. So durable equipment, and then they usually activities.
And for the medical assistance, anybody, not just a person who's autistic, like ADHD and dyslexia, anybody who has a neurodivergent brain wiring can apply for.
The autism waiver is just for people with the diagnosis of autism. There are other waivers for Medicaid. Um, that are out there for other diagnoses. Now, obviously, if you or yourself are low income, then your family can qualify for Medicaid, and that would cover some of these additional services.
Okay.
By law, when we're back to autism for 1 minute, by law, insurers in Maryland are required to cover something called ABA, Applied Behavioral Analysis. So this is therapy for any age, but especially for young kids that often can be like in a clinic, almost like a preschool. And insurance companies are required to pay for that. You have to have the assessment that you need it, but they're required by law to provide that service. So that's really important.
Yeah, I did a podcast with someone who owns an ABA therapy
Okay,
business for children, actually. So,
good.
all right. So, there's so many acronyms. There's DORS, DDA, MSDE for parents who are just starting out and who want to make sure that their kids have a job in the future. And I know you create policy for work as well. Which of these government doors should they knock on first?
You're going to make your child's transition plan as they get into their early teenage years. So as they get to 13, 14, you're going to make a transition plan for them. Your initial point of contact is going to be your school system. They're going to be the ones that help you do that transition planning. They're going to connect, they're going to be your connector to the Department of Rehabilitation door, for those services, things like internships and job training. Hopefully you'll get some of those opportunities while your child is still in high school, or at the very least you're connecting them into that system while they're in high school, so they can kind of go into that as they get a little bit older. I think it's really important. There's there's two basic ways forward. You can get a high school degree,
Mhm.
and maybe go to college and look for a job in the economy, or if you don't get a high school degree, you get something called a certificate. And for those students who get a certificate, those rehabilitation services, they're especially geared for those students who don't have the basic level of education that everybody, maybe most graduating students have. Those are the ones that need extra help, people that go along with them to a job coaches, making sure there's the right support, for them to succeed. So those are the students that, are often going to get those services from the Department of Rehabilitation, when they get of age.
Okay. Just looking forward in terms of, like, I know you're working at now. What are some signs of hope you see for these children when they turn into adults? Like, what is the government doing in terms of job security? Is there some progress happening in that front?
I mean, I think there's a lot of progress. I mean, I think one thing that definitely helped was during the pandemic, people got understanding of remote work as an option. This is something that can be very beneficial to people with disabilities, both physical disabilities and disabilities like autism, where being in an office, transportation, these things may be overwhelming, but working from home, may be more positive, for them. And we have shortages of workers, in key industries. One that I worked a lot is in manufacturing, where, although it's smaller than it used to be, there's still a lot of factories out there. They need people who want to do a job where they can do, maybe a similar thing, all day, in an environment where they don't necessarily have to always interact with people maybe as much as they would in other environments. And, a lot of autistic people thrive in manufacturing. In fact, there's a whole program in Philadelphia that's focused on, I think it's the Hope program, focused just on getting people with autism and neurodivergence into manufacturing, and they're having a lot of success. So I think there's a lot of good models there. We have something called the Autism Hiring Program. It's actually for mostly young adults who actually did well enough in school but couldn't find a job. But if you give them extra support and mentoring, and also you train their employer how to be more accepting, we're having a lot of success. I mean, over 90% completion rate for the program, and over 80% employment rate for people that come out of the program. So I think there's a lot of positive things that are happening in terms of employment for people with disabilities. We have a long way to go.
Mhm.
Unemployment rate for people with disabilities is something like 75% don't have a job, but we're still making progress.
Awesome. And do you have more information about, this blueprint for Maryland's future? Like, what should we expect from this?
What we're My understanding is that, there, by the end of this year, there's a task force looking at special education funding. They're looking into the idea of differentiated funding. So that'd be the idea that if a school has more people with significant disabilities, they would get maybe a little bit more than schools that may have students that don't have as many significant disabilities. So we are supposed to have that recommendation, by the end of this year, and how much funding is really needed. And that's something the legislature will have to grapple with, in the years to come.
The really important ones. So I know you mentioned that put yourself on the wait list even now because there's a 9 to 10 year wait list for that. But how do I ensure a confirmed job for my child in the future? Does advocacy change as the child gets older? Because right now I'm just fighting for, say, basic needs like classroom modifications and environmental modifications. How does advocacy change later?
Yeah, I think you're always going to be, advocating, for your child. There's a lot of different, as you get to adulthood, there's different options, right? You know, you're you may have an agency that is responsible for coordinating services, for your adult child with a disability. And that agency may be your primary place that coordinates how your child's going to get access, to employment, volunteering, recreation, activities. One of the best known ones here is the Arc of Howard County in Ellicott City. So they have a center where people go during the day and they do recreational activities, and they take them out into the community to do volunteering and employment. Um, you know, other other students are gonna, other folks are gonna go through door, and the family's gonna be involved, really helping to advocate to make sure they really get opportunities. Usually starts with job coaching, someone to go with them to a job, so they can get more comfortable with it. And having the right level of support over time usually takes more than one, job to find the right fit. Not Don't get discouraged. And then also one thing that's really great is that we have a number of higher education programs that are really exciting.
Mhm.
Howard Community College has a program for disabled, folks going who want to go to get some training there. University of Maryland, their uh, CHIRP program now even has continued dorm housing for 2 years after people finish that 2 year program in College Park, so they can live on their own, but still in and still getting some services in around New Maryland. So there's different pathways. You're going to keep advocating. There's no one size fits all for people, going forward and into independence. And one thing I would say about that, it's also important for you to get their siblings involved, because as your child gets older, their siblings are going to really have to be there for them and helping them with their advocacy, because we're not, they can't count on us forever.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. It's a family support group. When you're deciding on funding for, the neurodivergent brain, do you have different limits for different kinds of disorders like autism gets X or ADHD gets X, that one is more intense than the other, or it's kind of equal for everyone?
Yeah, no, I think when we're thinking about the kind of services that you're going to get, it should be based on your need. So what are we crossing those things to? We're crossing them to your physical needs, your intellectual disability, because for both those things that you're just mentioning, you can be someone that does not have intellectual disability, or you can be. Are you someone that's able to graduate high school with a Maryland diploma, or are you not? All of these are really, I think these are the more important factors
Mm-hmm.
for considering what level of services you're going to get than actually just a specific diagnosis. Because each diagnosis, they're pretty broad, right? And they can cover a lot of things. We really need to look at that person's need. Department of Developmental Disabilities Administration, DDA, they do a functional assessment of every potential client.
Okay.
What kind of supports do you need to be safe, to be independent? And everyone's going to be different. It really should be based on those needs, not the specific disability.
Okay. Because I always wondered autism, it's like such a wide spectrum, right? Someone could be highly functional or not functional. And then you just wonder, like, where is the money going here? Is it
Yeah.
going more towards autism or ADHD or dyslexia? Uh, that makes total sense. Well, I think I've covered all my very important questions. I really do appreciate you joining today.
Thank you so much for your attention to our community.
Thank you
Of course.
so much once again.
Thank you so much, Rashaka. We'll talk to you soon.